Hello. I'd like to thank the organizers of this international expert workshop, the Danish Agency for Culture, the Government of Greenland, and the International Work Group for Indigenous Affairs for inviting me to participate in this important event that is being held on the occasion of the World Heritage Convention's 40th anniversary. I regret that I'm unable to attend the expert workshop in person, but welcome the opportunity to present a video message related to the 40th anniversary at this occasion, which is being celebrated by UNESCO under the theme World Heritage and Sustainable Development, the Role of Local Communities. I look forward to reading the observations and recommendations that follow from this meeting and to incorporating them where appropriate into my own work as Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples is one of several so-called special procedures established by the United Nations Human Rights Council. Essentially, my mandate from the Council is to monitor the conditions of Indigenous peoples worldwide, make recommendations to remedy situations in which their human rights are being violated, and promote good practice consistent with relevant international standards. The Human Rights Council has specifically called upon the Special Rapporteur to, and I quote, develop a regular cooperative dialogue with relevant United Nations bodies, specialized agencies, and programs, and also to promote the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and international instruments relevant to the advancement of the rights of Indigenous peoples where appropriate, end of quote. At the same time, the Council has called upon UN agencies, intergovernmental organizations, and governments to cooperate to the fullest extent possible with the mandate of the Special Rapporteur in fulfillment of the mandate. This is consistent with Article 42 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which reminds the various UN agencies that they should together act with an overall coherence and in accordance with the standards expressed in the Declaration in order to ensure the realization of the provisions of the Declaration. Article 42 states, and again I quote, the United Nations, its bodies, including the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, and specialized agencies, including at the country level, and states shall promote respect for and full application of the provisions of this declaration and follow up the effectiveness of this declaration, end of quote. In October 2011, I participated in a meeting at the headquarters of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, in Paris, at which the organization launched its work to develop a policy on Indigenous peoples. In a statement, I emphasized that UNESCO programming, just as that of other United Nations agencies that touch upon Indigenous peoples' interest, must at a minimum be consistent with the international standards that had developed in that regard, as well as with relevant national laws and policies. Ideally, however, UNESCO programming would do more than avoid harm to Indigenous peoples, but would actively support their rights, as it already had in numerous instances and through numerous programs. I expressed my belief that a UNESCO policy could assist greatly in supporting the rights of Indigenous peoples in three main ways. First, by assisting UNESCO to reflect on the effects of its existing programming on Indigenous peoples as part of an evaluative process. Second, by assisting UNESCO in its strategic planning for programs affecting Indigenous peoples, incorporating the objective of promoting and protecting the rights of Indigenous peoples into its programmatic work. And third, by providing UNESCO with practical orientation for consultation with Indigenous peoples in relation to UNESCO programs and activities. During my time in Paris, I also met representatives of UNESCO programs relevant to Indigenous peoples, including representatives of the World Heritage Center and of the Intangible Cultural Heritage section. I brought to the attention of UNESCO information that I had received in relation to the impacts on Indigenous peoples of specific World Heritage sites and in relation to the inscription of certain sites in the World Heritage List without the free, prior, and informed consent of the Indigenous peoples in whose territories they are located. Since then, I have continued to look into the issue in the context of my visits as Special Rapporteur to countries and in my examination of specific cases. For example, during my visit to Argentina in November and December 2012, I was informed of problems associated with the Quebrada the Umawaka World Heritage Site. Among other things, I received information that Indigenous peoples living around the site were not involved in the process of its declaration as a World Heritage Site, were not participating in the management of the site, and felt limited in their abilities to maintain their traditional and subsistence activities within the site. It is worth noting, however, that I have also heard about positive examples in this regard, including the Laponian area in northern Sweden, where both the natural features as well as the Sami reindeer herding culture are protected and where a new management structure was recently established that ensures a direct role for the Sami in the conservation and management of the World Heritage Area and is built on consensus decision-making. Another example of a good practice is the designation of Taos Pueblo in New Mexico, United States of America, as a World Heritage Site, which was proposed by the Taos people themselves. In carrying out my mandate as Special Rapporteur, I will continue to look at the issue of World Heritage Site designations affecting Indigenous peoples with the hope of encouraging further good practices in this regard. I would therefore like to add my support to the proposal of the expert mechanism on the rights of Indigenous peoples, encouraging the World Heritage Committee, quote, to establish a process to elaborate with the full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples changes to the current procedures and operating guidelines and other appropriate measures to ensure that the implementation of the World Heritage Convention is consistent with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and that Indigenous peoples can effectively participate in the World Heritage Convention's decision-making processes, end of quote. Likewise, I would like to support the resolution of the World Conservation Congress adopted just last week, which, among other things, urges the World Heritage Committee to, and again I quote, review and revise its procedures and operational guidelines to ensure that Indigenous peoples' rights and all human rights are upheld and implemented in the management and protection of existing World Heritage Sites, and that no World Heritage Sites are established in Indigenous peoples' territories without their free, prior, and informed consent, end of quote. I note that my distinguished colleague, the Human Rights Council's independent expert in the field of cultural rights, Farida Shahid, has also emphasized in one of her reports that no inscription on UNESCO lists relating to cultural heritage should be requested or granted without the free, prior, and informed consent of the concerned communities. Finally, in light of the theme of the 40th anniversary, World Heritage and Sustainable Development, the role of local communities, I would like to add my voice to the recent request from Indigenous organizations that World Heritage nominations and monitoring mission reports be made publicly available as soon as they are received by UNESCO, so that affected Indigenous peoples, local communities, and other rights and stakeholders have sufficient time to review the documents and provide input and comments in advance of any decision being taken by the World Heritage Committee. I draw attention in this connection to the outcome document of the recent United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio, The Future We Want, in which governments underscored the broad public participation and access to information are essential to the promotion of sustainable development, and that sustainable development requires the meaningful involvement and active participation of all major groups, including Indigenous peoples. I would like to conclude by wishing you all the best for a successful meeting. Again, I look forward to reading the observations and recommendations that follow from the report. And I send you greetings from Namibia, where I'm carrying out a mission. Thank you very much.